And I felt very strong that my employees that were involved in that night, as well as myself, had made really good decisions. I thought this thing went perfectly smooth. Woke up next morning and it just took off. 5 white officers involved in a shooting of a black college student in a major college, and it just exploded. There was a lot of attention on this thing that the media, and they were really harping on the race issue, and they were harping on him being a student. And what I did not know is that this individual had polio as a child. So now I want you to back up and look at this from the perspective of a student that he taught in class. He was 36 years old. He periodically used a cane to walk around on. The use of that cane was obvious to a lot of people. He walked funny, which obviously that night we didn't pick up on a short amount of distance. He had been obtaining mental health support through the college, and he was receiving a lot of medication for various reasons from the university. And this individual happened to be their number one concern. He'd been having trouble at work with the office. Some office staff was scared of him. He was making comments that was concerning him. So there's a lot of issues going on here. So the night we engaged him, the perception from the student population and from the administration is the pipe that he had in his hand with the screw sticking out of it was his cane. So that became the focus of the story is, oh my gosh, they shot a person with polio who's carrying a cane. And that's what they shot him in his own house. So this became this big story, which was so far from the truth, but that's what the story was. And the protesters just fed off of the fact that who he was and what had happened to him, and they had no idea that he was highly intoxicated that night, that he was under the influence of various medications, that he had armed himself with a metal pole with a screw sticking out, and was in possession of a very large butcher knife. They didn't know any of that. And none of that ever got put out there. None of that was ever fed to them to prevent them from protesting. And very early on, I started seeing what I have learned to call the art of self-preservation. I started seeing people involved in this situation start backing up from accountability issues. The college obviously felt the stress of the direction that the media was taking this and the fact that the protesters were feeding off of the media. And the college started panicking. And so they told the police agency, hey, we're going to start handling media responsibilities. We're going to hire an attorney to defend us. We're going to handle this at our level. Now, we're talking about college administrators that have no idea what a law enforcement tactical situation is. They're going to take over responsibility. And that was fueled because the protesters were reacting off what they were being fed through the media, and they just pushed and they pushed and they pushed until the fear was the college had to take action. Instead of the college standing up and saying, look, we had an individual that was armed, that was under the influence of stuff, that did not react to a less lethal option, that was ultimately shot. We put the blame on him. They didn't do that. So they had to find some route to pacify the protesters. And what was that? Of course, like we do throughout this country, get rid of the police officer that caused the problem. Get rid of the officer and that will squelch that issue. That will chill them down, they'll settle down, and we can move forward. And that's exactly what happened. The agency did their investigation. The state agency came and investigated the shooting and cleared us. It was very, very supportive of the decision to shoot and the way the situation went down. But then after the whole investigation was over, I was granted access to look at the crime scene. Laying on the ground were cartridges from tasers, beanbag rounds that had been expended out of a 12-gauge shotgun. Laying on the ground was a very large butcher knife. There was no cane to be found that was such a big concern. The crime scene revealed additional things, including a garbage can full of beer cans and empty vodka bottles. What is generally my cabinet in my house in the kitchen that holds my plates is full of empty pharmaceutical bags that are all with the various colors of the college on them, as well as there's over 100 empty medication bottles in there that were issued to him by this college. The individual's mental health status, his under the influence of his narcotics and his alcohol was so prevalent in that scene, including the fact that we had used all these less lethal responses that he was not affected by that ultimately led to us shooting him. The focus became, at least from an administrative standpoint, they said to me, somebody's going to have to fall for this. And I remember looking at my chief thinking, somebody's going to fall for this? Nobody did anything wrong. Why would somebody fall for this? There was never a formal complaint filed on the 5 of us by anybody directly involved in this case. The shooter didn't file a complaint. The dean didn't file a complaint. So because none of those individuals filed a complaint, they started internal affairs without the complaint. And in the state of Florida, you're allowed to know who your complainant is and what the complaint is before an internal affairs can start. So what the department did is they directed a captain to file a formal complaint for excessive use of force. And ultimately, the complaint on excessive use of force was never sustained. They didn't find any issue with excessive use of force. They didn't find any issues with entry into his facility, his home being unlawful. They didn't find any issues with the actual shooting. So the protesters protested for many months throughout this process. And when the state attorney came out with their findings, they really started protesting more. They were frustrated that no charges were going to be filed against the young man who pulled the trigger as well as any of us. But the day that they held a press conference, and the day that they stuck my photo out there, and the day they said that the lieutenant's contract was going to be non-renewed, or ultimately he was going to be fired for the decisions made that night, their protesting stopped because I think they felt like they got their person.